I want to turn to our first candidate, member of the Planning Board currently, Casey Anderson. Welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Thanks for having me here to talk about the future of our community.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. So, Mr. Anderson, what I'm going to do is start off with a set of 9 questions. You've received them in advance of this meeting, and wanted to go through those, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they have additional questions or any follow-up questions based on the answers that you've given us. So I'll start off with the first one. Why do you want to be the chair of the Planning Board, and what in your background qualifies you for this role?
I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son, and I want to make sure that I do everything that I can to ensure that when they grow up, that Montgomery County will be the sort of place that they can find a good job, that they can find a place to live that's affordable, where they are going to find the amenities that they want to make it the sort of place that they would want to raise a family if that's what they choose to do. My parents are both 75 years old. They're here today. They've come to cheer me on. They moved here a couple of years ago from Florida after having initially retired to Florida from Colorado. They like the fact that they can live in downtown Silver Spring in an apartment building where they can walk to the doctor's office, to the grocery store, and of course, most importantly, down the street to visit their grandchildren. And I think that it's absolutely essential that we focus on making sure that as our residents get older, that they have the same kinds of choices to make. Some people will choose a different lifestyle. They want to age in place in a single-family detached house where they might have lived for decades. But others are going to want to make a transition to a different type of lifestyle, different access that doesn't require them to get in a car every time they want to go out to eat or meet the daily needs of their lives. So that's the reason why I think that this role is exciting and important, and that's why I'd want to do it. As to my qualifications, I would say that all of the candidates, the other candidates you're interviewing today, are really remarkable people who've made tremendous contributions to the county, and I'm honored to be considered in that group. If there's one thing that sets me apart, I think that it's in the energy, enthusiasm, and commitment for this role that I've displayed on the Planning Board and that I would bring to the task of being the chair.
Thank you very much. What do you feel are the most important issues facing the Planning Board, and what would be your top 3 priorities as chair?
In my application letter, I talked about some of the big picture issues about trying to orient the land use planning function more closely around the economic development goals of the county. And I described in some detail what the relationship is of transportation infrastructure and services, affordable housing, and even market rate housing for people at higher income levels as well, what the relationship of all those things is to economic development. But for today, and in response to this question, I'd like to address a few near-term things that I would prioritize on day one. First, I would say that it's absolutely essential to create a collaborative and constructive working relationship, not only with this council, but also with the other agencies that we work with, particularly in the executive branch of county government, as well as at the state level, State Highway Administration, and others. I think that I've demonstrated the ability to do that during the deliberations over the White Oak master plan that's currently before you, and also in the course of developing the countywide transitways functional master plan that you approved recently. I worked closely with members of the executive branch staff to address the very complex issues that arose in crafting those plans for your consideration. I think that the second thing that I'd want to focus on right away is to build on the work of streamlining that's already been done. In particular, the development review calendar that's required as part of the new zoning rewrite that I supported when we were developing recommendations that you later adopted for the zoning rewrite. I think that's important because it will bring more transparency and accountability not only to our staff, which we should embrace, but also to the other agencies that are involved in the development review process. So if there are problems with projects getting held up in the bureaucratic process, it will be easier to identify where the bottlenecks are and to enforce accountability for getting things done in a timely way, because that's essential in order, as I say, to meet the economic development goals that are at the core of what I think our planning process is really ultimately designed to accomplish. And the third goal is affordable housing. And the reason I put this right away is because you have funded some of the affordable housing studies and initiatives that we proposed in our work plan, particularly studying garden apartments, other types of situations that arise where we want to make sure that we can generate new housing units for every income level, but also avoid displacement of people who are currently living in naturally occurring affordable housing. So I'd identify those as the three right off the bat that should be addressed.
Well, thank you very much. What is your understanding of the role of chair as it relates to other members of the board and also to the council?
Well, as I've said, I think that the planning board and department work best when we are collaborating with you to solve problems and to address the goals that we all share as a county around economic development and the balance that we need to strike between that goal and environmental protection, as well as protection of existing neighborhoods and people's settled expectations about the way that they would like to live. I think that the planning board's role is to frame issues for your consideration. When we are involved in our regulatory review role, we are acting as, in effect, as judges, and we have to apply legal standards to individual cases. But when we're developing master plans or other policy recommendations, our role is to frame the choices for you so you'll be able to address them effectively and work your will. And I think that that's the way that the process should work. The statute says we are your primary advisors on land use issues, and I would take that role of counselor, not dictator, to heart.
How do you think we should deal with future development and redevelopment issues, and what is the planning board's role in supporting existing communities as well?
Well, I think everybody knows that I love urban areas, but I also celebrate the many successful suburban and rural communities in our county. When I travel around the county, I think the East County of neighborhoods like Burnt Mills and Springbrook, beautiful neighborhoods with single-family detached houses that are proximate to some of the areas that are going to be targeted for redevelopment and growth, like White Oak, like downtown Silver Spring, and will in fact benefit from the revitalization that comes with that redevelopment, but not be disturbed by it or disrupted, hopefully in any way. And on the west side of the county, I think of Carter-Rock, I think of Potomac, I think of places, I think of Germantown Town Center, which is not necessarily an intensively developed urban area, but it's attracting a more diverse range of uses. And as that area continues to develop, I think we see some exciting opportunities for people to benefit, again, from the kinds of amenities that are available when you allow a measured amount of development to occur, hopefully oriented more around transit than the automobile. But I recognize that some neighborhoods, like the Butts property, also up in Clarksburg, will be developed as an age-restricted retirement community for people who don't want to live in an urban area, and I think that's great too. So I think that we can allow for and encourage the development or redevelopment of urban places and make them even more exciting and vibrant. And yes, we will try to provide more and higher quality transit service, but we will also respect the fact that the county has a great many very successful suburban communities and rural areas that should be preserved just as they are.
You know, in your experience as a planning board member, that many of the council's land use decisions require balancing the community's desires for further economic development, neighborhood protection, and enhanced environmental protection. What factors would you look at in trying to achieve a reasonable balance in these individual cases?
Well, in the case of environmental protection versus economic development, I think that in the last 10 or 20 years, there have been major advances in the scientific understanding of stormwater management in particular that give us the opportunity to redevelop in ways that are actually good for the environment, that we can more effectively achieve water quality goals while allowing redevelopment in a way that is consistent with our economic development goals. In the case of the balance of economic development versus existing communities, I think that, as I mentioned a minute ago, we will respect the existing suburban pattern of development in many parts of the county. And I think that the specific things that we've done, for example, in the zoning rewrite, the CR zones and the 45-degree angular plane setback requirements, I think are some very positive and meaningful steps that we've taken to provide some assurance to the neighborhoods that abut new development or redevelopment of mixed-use areas, that they're not going to be run over by that, or that their quality of life is not going to be compromised as a result. So I think that we have the tools to strike that balance in place.
What is your view of the Planning Board's overall responsibility for our park system, and what do you see as the chair's role specifically related to that?
Well, we are a Parks Commission as well as the Planning Board, and I take that role as a steward of the park system just as seriously as our role in the planning process and in the real estate development part of our mission. I think there are a couple areas that we need to focus on. One is parks in more densely populated or urban areas. These are areas which used to be predominantly oriented around places to work or retail, restaurants, those sort of things. Now they're also becoming places to live, and the places where people live are also places where they need green space, open space, public use space. And so I think we should address the ways in which our rules can encourage consolidation of some of those spaces to make them more useful, both from a recreational point of view as well as an environmental and aesthetic point of view as development projects are approved. The second area that I would focus on is the fact that we have, with a couple 100,000 more people coming here over the next 20 or so years, depending on whose projections you believe, we're certainly going to have growth. We're certainly going to have more people. And those people will have more recreation needs. Their kids need a place to play soccer. Some people, I know some of you like to play tennis. You need to have ball fields, baseball fields, rec centers, all those things for a growing population to meet those needs. On the other hand, we have to balance that against the stewardship mission of the Parks Department to protect natural resources. I believe that with over 35,000 acres of parkland, there's room for both natural resource protection and active recreation, but that's obviously going to be more challenging in the future, especially because our resources are more constrained than they ever have been in the past.
Thank you. As you know, this position carries with it obligations for attending a myriad of meetings, making appearances, and other activities that include nights and weekends. Will you make the time commitments required to fill these elements of the role?
Yes, and I believe that I have been second to no one on the planning board in my demonstrated commitment to meeting with anybody who would like to talk about any topic that's permissible under the rules. I have met with literally hundreds of people in dozens of separate meetings. Many have been one-on-one, a cup of coffee at the Tasty Diner in Bethesda or Silver Spring, in church basements, at civic association meetings, in people's living rooms, as well as, of course, many meetings that we've had at the planning department. And that would continue to be my policy, to be open to talk to anybody who wants to meet with me about any permissible topic. I think that carries with it a responsibility not only to have an open door, but also to reach out to people who may not realize that opportunity is available to them. And so I've made a point of calling people up. I'll see them if they come to testify at a hearing. I'll say, hey, would you like to come by? Maybe we could get together. We could talk about this further, to make sure that people know that I'm available and accessible and willing to engage with them on the topics that are involved in our work.
Well, you answered the second part of that question, which is, have you engaged in community outreach activities, and if so, what were they? So great job there. Moving on to the second and last question, are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware?
No.
And last, are there other points about your interest in the chair that you would like to call to the council's attention?
Well, I'd like to highlight, for one, the need to improve not only the quantity of public participation or the number of people who are reached by our communications, but also the quality. And one of the ideas that I highlighted in my letter is the idea that by developing better in-house real estate finance and economic expertise, I think we can improve the quality of public engagement by giving citizens the tools that they need to understand some of the trade-offs that are involved in our work. For example, if we have a property that's going to be developed where the master plan calls for a public park or a plaza, perhaps under private ownership, understanding the relationship between density, building height, the amount of open space that can be provided at particular levels of development intensity is a very important question that many members of the community and even members of the planning board have a difficult time grappling with without a source of independent analysis and information. And so that's one of the specific things that I would hope to do to improve the quality of participation as well as the quality of the decisions that we make and frame for your consideration. It's been absolutely an honor and a privilege to be able to serve on the planning board. I want to thank you for all of that. It's been a wonderful experience, and I can promise you that if you select me to be the chair, I will do everything I can to assist you in this joint enterprise of trying to make our community an even better place for the future.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. I will now turn it over to my colleagues who might have some additional follow-up questions. I'll begin with Councilmember Leventhal.
Mr. Anderson, thank you for applying. We have an excellent field of applicants, and we're very fortunate, you among them. Do you support the locally preferred alternative for the Purple Line, including the use of the Georgetown branch right-of-way?
Yes, unequivocally. And in fact, when I was a member of the board of the Washington Area Bicyclist Association, I drafted and won unanimous support for the WABA board for the locally preferred alternative, including putting it in the Georgetown branch alignment with the added proviso that would actually improve the trail and allow its extension into downtown Silver Spring, which I think will be a great amenity for the neighborhoods that abut the trail and the future of Purple Line service.
What are your thoughts about how the county can maintain the agricultural reserve, and what do you see as the planning board's role in that regard?
I think that the agricultural reserve was one of the three sets of decisions most important, and by important I mean good, that the county has made in the period since the 1964 general plan was adopted. The others being the decisions to develop the central business districts in downtown Silver Spring and Bethesda, White Flint and White Oak, those decisions to urbanize those parts of the county, together with the Ag Reserve and also our commitment to transit, the Purple Line, CCT, and now Bus Rapid Transit, together allow us to realize the vision of the general plan, which is a county that has wonderful rural areas, wonderful suburban areas, wonderful urban areas all together. And without all those things working together, the others will not be as successful. So I'm absolutely committed to preservation of the agricultural reserve. I think that we should hold firm on the idea that the agricultural reserve should be oriented around primarily keeping farmland under agricultural production, but also serving the other benefits that it provides to the county, namely environmental benefits from stormwater recharge, air quality, and recreation for all of us who live in the county but don't necessarily live in the agricultural reserve's boundaries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Leventhal. Councilmember Florine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson, for your service on the board and your willingness to go through this process. I gather there's been for a number of interviews and the like within the community. I have a question that's been posed to me by others. Folks know you as a very supportive of transit issues. But What do you say to the people in the Up County who feel that their needs are not adequately addressed and can't be adequately addressed in long term by transit alone?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't believe, expect, or think it would be desirable for everybody to live in an urban area. And I don't think that that's necessary or a good idea, and I know that that's not what many people want. As I said, I think there are a number of projects that are every bit as exciting to me as some of the urban projects that I've advocated and supported. I mentioned the Butts property. I'd also say the Tapestry development that's in the area sort of between Germantown and Clarksburg on the west side of I-270. That's another very high-quality new residential development that I think is going to be very attractive and provide a high quality of living for the people who decide to move in there. And I think I name-checked several of my favorite neighborhoods in the down county that are not necessarily urban, but also extremely successful and highly desirable. And I have no intention of doing anything that would compromise the quality of those neighborhoods or their desirability as places to live.
Well, my question went to the concern that you're such a transit advocate, that you see that as the only way of serving the county at large.
Obviously, people are going to drive. I drove here today. I didn't ride my bicycle or hitchhike.
I bet everybody here drove here today.
Right. I drove here. When the Purple Line comes, maybe it'll be a little easier to get here by transit. But obviously, I think that there's a tool for every task. So when I'm at my house just outside the Silver Spring Central Business District, if I want to go to Fenton and Ellsworth to go to a movie at the Majestic Theater, I usually ride my bike because it's faster than driving, because I can ride my bike a few blocks and park it right in front of the theater, lock it up there. I don't have to even wait to try to find a parking space. When I want to get to Rockville or to Germantown to take my son to a soccer game, I get in my car. So I would say that I consider myself a realist and a pragmatist on this as in other questions. And if transit is not the right solution, we're going to continue to accommodate people who want to drive, and that includes roads, obviously, and the other services that are necessary to support that pattern of development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Florine. Councilmember Andrews.
Well, thank you for your service on the planning board already, and thank you for applying to be the chair. It's a very important and challenging job, as I know you are aware, seeing it up close. What is the most valid criticism that you've heard of the planning board, and what would you do as chair to address it?
I think that sometimes the idea that we are an independent agency is taken to mean that we can operate in a vacuum. And as I think I've made clear, I don't think that that serves the county's interests. I also believe that you are best served when we can give you our unvarnished judgment, taking the long view, the broad view, letting you make those choices, and that we haven't failed if you ultimately make a different decision. But I also think that we have to recognize that we don't live in a bubble down at 8787 Georgia Avenue, that we are all in this together in the task of trying to improve the quality of life in this community, and that at some level we do need to be in sync in general terms with what is it that we're trying to do here. And I've tried to be very upfront in my application letter about what it is I think that task is, namely that we should orient our activities around economic development and all that that implies. I've spelled that out in detail, consistent with environmental, social, economic sustainability, and consistent with the settled expectations of the people who live here right now and came here expecting one thing and don't necessarily want to do something radically different. So I think that that's the task in front of us, and I would hope that we would be responsive, transparent, and accountable in our dealings with you as well as the executive branch.
Okay, thank you. What do you think would be a reasonable starting salary for the new chair of the planning board?
I really would not feel comfortable offering an opinion on that subject. I think that it's appropriate for you to decide what salary is necessary to attract and retain somebody of the quality that you would want to serve in this role. I suppose the furthest I would go is to say that perhaps we should benchmark it to the salaries that are received by perhaps a combination or average of the executive branch department head salaries or some similar kind of a benchmark, so we wouldn't have to go through the process of back and forth about what should the planning board chair be paid every 4 or 8 years. But other than that, I would not care to venture a specific number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Andrews. Councilmember Berliner.
Good afternoon, Mr. Anderson. Thank you for your service to our community. One of the benefits of your application is your experience on the commission, on the board. So let me ask you a sort of a follow-up to Mr. Andrews' question. Mr. Leventhal asked one of mine with respect to Ag Reserve, and somebody else asked one of mine on a different topic. So it has been said to me that one of the weaknesses of your organization is that it is, quote, bottoms-up driven, not top-down driven. That at the staff level, staff, if you will, take control of the process, such that when it comes up to the commission, even to the chair, it's like, really? So speak to that, if you will, if you find that to be a valid observation, and if so, what you would do about it, and anything else internal to the organization. I appreciated the broad response to Mr. Andrews. I'd like you to go, if you will, a little more interior to how it operates and your sense of, is it operating as efficiently as possible? And if not, what will you do if we grant you this opportunity to fix those kinds of things?
Well, let me start by saying that I have tremendous respect for the many outstanding professionals that we have in our agency. These people are by and large not motivated by salary or ambition. They are people who want to serve this county and want to get the right answer. When a problem is presented, they would like to do their best to do their jobs as effectively and professionally as they know how. As I alluded to in my answer to Mr. Andrews' question, I do think that there are some times when the staff's role as independent professionals can, in some respects, be misconceived. And I think that the staff, much as we frame issues for you for your consideration, we do not dictate them. I think that the staff's role is to prepare us to deliver work product to you that will enable you to do that. And I think that I've displayed an independence of judgment and a willingness to challenge the staff in a healthy and respectful way and insist that alternatives be framed in a way that are meaningful so we're not left with a single choice. I think that most of the time when we don't have that kind of work product available to us, it's not because the staff is intentionally trying to force the issue or present us with a fait accompli. I guess I'd use the best example I can think of recently is that with the White Oak Master Plan. We were presented with a staff work product that made certain assumptions about transportation without a great deal of time to ask the staff to go back and consider different alternatives. I don't think that was anybody's intention, but the result was that we got a draft from the staff that was very difficult to adapt, given that we made some certain different judgments about what the priorities should be, namely in favor of economic development in the East County, as opposed to putting some of the intersection congestion tests at the center of driving those recommendations. And so I think we were left without really enough time to craft a set of recommendations that were different than what the staff recommended, that were as ready as I would have liked them to be to send up to the council. Now, as to what we can do about that, I think that the role of the planning board chair is to work through the planning director. Obviously, the planning board chair cannot be micromanaging individual staff members, but to work through the planning director and hold the planning director accountable for holding staff accountable, not only for getting their work done on time, but also in developing a set of recommendations that we can work with to frame choices effectively for you. In concrete terms, on a day-to-day basis, that means that a full-time planning board chair, I think that's why we have a full-time planning board chair, has to be very tuned into what's going on in the building, has to spend a lot of time understanding what the moving parts are inside the agency. The other part of it is that I think when we're engaged in our master plan work, I think it's helpful for the staff to bring us iterations of their work so we can make mid-course corrections when that is appropriate. And I think we've seen a little bit of that more recently with plans like the Bethesda Plan, the Aspen Hill Minor Master Plan Amendment, and others, where they've come to us earlier on in the process and given us more of an opportunity to say, well, I'm not sure about this idea. Have you considered this? We'd like to see an alternative in this other area. And I think that that's healthy and appropriate and will help us to give you a work product that's ready for you to make the final policy call.
In your response to one of the questions, you made allusion to financial analysis. If I understood you correctly, what you were going to try and help yourself as board as well as this council understand the financial implications of certain levels of development or not levels of development. I recall in the Chevy Chase Lakes sector plan where you and I had a professional disagreement as to the amount that was necessary, that our council was devoid of any analysis of whether at lower levels of development it was, quote, economically feasible, and that we had to do that analysis here at the council staff level. So I didn't know if I understood your statement to allude to that as well, so that insofar as that part of the difficult questions we have to ask ourselves is the financial risks associated with saying yes or no to something. Is can it happen? Could it happen at something less? Developers are going to ask for things that obviously make it as profitable as possible for them. I don't begrudge them that. But to the extent to which we're making an independent analysis of whether or not something else wonderful could happen, albeit perhaps a little less than what a developer has asked for, we need to have that kind of financial analysis. Is that what you were giving voice to?
Well, that's precisely it. And I think that's one, the Chevy Chase Lake Plan is a great example where we were forced, because in the absence of other information, to rely on economic analysis that was presented to us by property owners. And after Mr. Sesker was hired by the council, we were left without our own in-house ability to generate our own independent assessment to be able to have a reality check as to whether or not what we're being told is correct. I'd also point out that this has application to the question of public benefits in exchange for bonus density. If we don't understand what public benefits cost and what the different economics are of real estate development in different parts of the county with different levels of market demand, then it's very hard for us to calibrate the level of public benefits that we can negotiate for when we're talking to property owners about what should be expected when they develop their property. And in the absence of that information, we're really just taking a stab and hoping that we get the right answer. If we guess too high and we try to extract too much, we can kill projects that are otherwise in the public interest. If we guess too low, then we're leaving money on the table that could be used to provide public benefits over and above the simple benefit of having nice real estate that's being constructed.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Berliner. Councilmember Branson.
Thank you. And thank you for your service, Mr. Anderson. I want to ask you, it's recently brought to my attention that the last 2 or 3, maybe, planning board chairs have only served 1 term, which I thought was rather curious. So my question is one big question, but sort of a 2-part question, and so here it goes. What do you think accounts for the 1-term itis of the planning board chair? And whatever your answer is to that, what would you change so that it wouldn't be? Because I just personally believe that continuity and longevity have their place. And so the changing and the lack of institutional knowledge that seems to, or the fact that the institutional knowledge then seems to be vested in the staff, which probably might not be a bad thing, I don't know. But so that's my question, that the one-term itis bug has affected 2 or 3 previous chairs. Why, and how would you change it?
I think that there's a delicate balance between the planning board chair being so assertive in outlining a vision and a perspective on where the county should go with land use planning that the council feels like they're put in a corner and that they're being asked to take it or leave it, on the one hand. And on the other hand, planning board chair who's reluctant to exercise intellectual leadership and say, this is a perspective that may challenge you, that may be difficult in some ways, but here are the arguments, and this is the way that we think the planning board believes that you should go. And if you're too soft or too hard, I think you run into trouble. I don't think that the county council is ever going to listen to the planning board or the planning board chair just because the statute says we're your primary advisors. You'll only listen to us if you believe that we're giving you advice that is wise, that is backed up by data and analysis that makes sense, and that it warrants your respect and attention because you come to trust that we're delivering you some options that make sense. And that's what I would strive to achieve. I think, as I said earlier, I think our role is to frame the issues for you. Obviously, I would advance a position that we believe is the correct one, that the board believes is the right answer. But if you make a different decision, I respect the fact that you are the ones ultimately who are democratically accountable, not us. And I think that that's wholly appropriate for you in many cases to make a different decision. And we have to have a relationship between the planning board and the county council that does not insist that we always agree, but is mutually respectful, amicable, and based on a shared commitment to trying to figure out what is the right way to address the challenges that we face to prepare our county for the future.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Branson. Councilmember Elrich.
I have a few other questions. Is it your view that the planning board director, chair, should direct the staff? To what end? I mean, is it, if you've already reached a conclusion about what you want, what is the role of the staff in that kind of environment?
Well, I don't wish to be understood to be saying that the planning board or its chair should tell the staff what the right answer is and to come up with an analysis to justify it. I believe that we should listen respectfully to what our professional staff has to say, and we want the benefit of their candid, unvarnished analysis of what they think the right answer is. But I think that everybody has a boss, and the planning director is responsible to the board and to the chair, just as we ultimately work for you, the county council. None of us is a free agent, and I think that we benefit when we allow the staff to feel that they have the ability to tell us what's really on their mind, what they really think, but also that they in turn respect the fact that we have a responsibility, that we are accountable to you for the decisions that we recommend to you, and we need the staff support to help us frame those choices in a way that allows us to make the recommendation that, based on our judgment, is the right answer. This is not about keeping the staff silent or suppressing their views. It's about the fact that there is a process which I think, when it's working effectively, allows the staff to play its role as professionals, allows us to play our role as advisors to you, and allows you to make the final policy decision based on a complete set of information and arguments about what the right choice is.
Would you support letting staff come before the council where their recommendations are different than the planning board and explain to us the basis of their different recommendations?
I don't
If
think...
this is about choices.
Well, when you say the staff, I think that, the staff is 120 people. So the head of the staff is the planning director. And there should be this is a hierarchical organization like any other. Yes, it's a public sector organization. It's one in which people have the right to free speech and to express their opinions. But it's also one in which, at the end of the day, the trains have to be made to run on time, and we have to have an orderly process for developing a set of recommendations. And I think that the buck stops first with the planning director to develop a staff position. They give us a draft which is publicly available. Everybody can see it. Everybody knows what the rationale was and the facts that back it up. And then we produce a planning board draft. And similarly, that is entirely transparent. So I don't think that I'm not sure I can embrace the idea that we should have the opportunity for 120 different planning staff people to come in and make a presentation to you on what their views are. Certainly, in a democracy, everybody has the right to contact their public officials and tell them what they think. But I think that in terms of getting our organization's work done efficiently and effectively, that I think that the process we have is basically the right one.
Well, I wasn't asking for 120 opinions, but I would have liked to have had staff opinions on Chevy Chase Lakes and on Long Branch and some of the other projects, because the board radically changed what the staff proposed, and it would have been good to know upon what basis the staff made their recommendations.
Well, I don't think it was any secret that we had a different view than the staff in Chevy Chase Lake or in Long Branch or in a number of other plans. And I'm not reluctant to have that opinion be made public. And as I say, they produce an extensive staff draft with a memo, and they come before us and talk about it in public and argue their case. So I don't think that there's any lack of transparency or opportunity for the staff to weigh in and express its unfettered views before, during, and after the planning board makes its views known. And as you know, the council often asks our staff to perform additional analysis, and I think that that's appropriate because they effectively work as your staff once the planning board draft leaves our headquarters building, and you have to go about the process of sorting through making the final decision.
Interesting. So your staff is our staff.
Well, we make them available to you, and you've got a few staff people here, but obviously you don't have the same. I've heard you make this point many times, that you don't have a group of 120 people with master's degrees or PhDs in planning and related fields, and so you very appropriately expect us to provide the analytical support that our staff can deliver in support of your work to try to figure out what you want to do on a particular master plan.
Okay. So about affordable housing. You voted on master plans that would have wiped out affordable housing in Long Branch, would have eliminated 2 of the remaining affordable housing complexes in Glenmont, and proposed undoing the affordable housing in White Oak. And at the beginning of your comments, you made a statement about a commitment to affordable housing. So in your mind, how do you simultaneously get rid of all this stuff and have an effective way of replacing it with not just MPDUs, but housing that serves the same population that are being displaced?
Well, I think that the staff's analysis, it's funny that you mentioned the staff's input, because the staff's analysis on those plans showed that there would be more housing units created, not just MPDUs or units that are available for people at the very lowest end of the income spectrum, which is important, but also housing units that would be new development that is market rate affordable to people of lower middle, and upper middle income levels, in service of creating more socioeconomically diverse neighborhoods. It's important to balance the potential for displacement in places like Long Branch against the need to create more housing at every price point, and to recognize that it's not just the lowest income citizens of Montgomery County, not just the people who are at the lower middle level who can qualify, or middle that can qualify for the MPDU program, but also that we need to create more market rate affordable housing, because this is a county where you can make a six-figure income as a family and still struggle to find a place that is attractive, that meets your needs, that's accessible to the place where you work, all those things. So I don't question or quarrel with the council's judgment in those cases, but I think that our recommendation was based on our best judgment about the holistic view of how can we create more housing units to take the pressure off of supply and therefore prices at every part of the price spectrum.
How many units are planned in the counties in your long-range forecast?
I haven't looked at the pipeline lately, but I know well, if you look at the pipeline numbers, it's somewhat misleading, because some of those pipeline projects are never going to be built. Some of those date from 10 or more years from now. So I'm not sure that's the most meaningful measurement of development capacity. I can tell you that as far as actual numbers of units being built, it's been 3,000 or less for the last 3 or 4 years, which is at a historic low. So I would not say that we've seen development activity that is particularly robust in the county, even coming out of the recession.
But in your mind, is that a market problem, or is that a zoning problem? Because as I recall, the round forecasts for the county are based on what's already been zoned, and that a person could go in and build, I don't know, 140,000 housing units in this county, not a person, but there's ample zoning on the ground today for everything you want to house, and the fact that people aren't building doesn't have anything to do with either your zoning or, to some extent, even the county's regulations.
Well, I don't think it's as simple as zoning versus the market. And to use an example from the commercial context of pipeline, the City Place Mall in Silver Spring, I think, has about 250,000 feet of unbuilt office that they have approval to build. That has probably zero chance of ever being built, even though it shows up in the pipeline numbers. So I can't tell you off the top of my head what I think the precise development capacity is that's realistically achievable under existing zoning or under existing development approvals, because it's a complicated set of issues that depends partially on the market. In the case of City Place, it's about the way the mall was constructed, and it's a very complicated issue that I don't think is susceptible to being distilled to one reason.
Just multiple reasons.
Well, I think I named a few of them, but I'm saying that it's not as simple as saying, well, it's a market problem and not a zoning problem.
Okay. Clarksburg, we just finished redoing the Clarksburg plan. You supported the rezoning of Clarksburg that the council largely undid. I'm curious as to how that fit with a smart growth vision for Montgomery County and what we're trying to achieve.
Well, the general plan calls for a corridor city in Clarksburg. And in 1994, this council, in its wisdom, decided that that community should be built on the headwaters of the 10 Mile Creek. I happen to think that was not a good idea, but we have 20,000 plus people living in Clarksburg, and the question in that case was what to do about it now that it's 2014 and we're going to try to allow Clarksburg to develop in a way that will be a self-sustaining economic and social unit, as well as a sustainable place from an environmental perspective. And we did approve, in fact, less development capacity in that plan than was called for in the 94 plan. You saw fit to shave that down further, and I think that that's an appropriate judgment for you to make. But I would say with respect to our decision-making process, we looked at the environmental analysis, we looked at the competing public policy goals, and what we thought was best for the people that had, as I said earlier, the settled expectations of people who expect there to be a center of activity there, where there would not only be housing units, but also a town center that would support transit, that would support the kind of amenities that people were shown when they bought their houses. Those considerations were part of that balance. And as I said before, I don't think that we can have a relationship where the council says, well, the planning board didn't come to the same conclusion we did, therefore we got it wrong. I think that we need to frame choices for you in a way that allow you to make up your own mind, and I think that there's nothing that's inappropriate about that.
I'll just close by saying if you're going to frame choices, you actually have to frame choices. If you come in with one thing and don't articulate what the options are, we're left to basically do this on our own, with our staff having been involved in several master plans, making major changes to master plans that you brought forward, because we don't get choices. And as far as what your staff can say, your staff will not say what their views are on things that are separate and apart from what's finally been approved by the board. And that is a very frustrating situation when you can't ask a staff member, what was the basis of your decision that went before the planning board, and what led you all to believe as a team or whatever, because I know these things are done by teams, that a certain level of intensity was appropriate and certain uses were appropriate, and then not to be able to ask that question and get an answer. That doesn't frame any choices for me. It leaves us, not having benefit of the staff and not having, benefit of the kind of research and work that went into it.
Well, as my former predecessor, my former mentor used to say, isn't that so? Sheila Hickson, who always used to tell me about making comments instead of asking questions. Let's try and limit ourselves to questions here as we are pressed for time as well. We have a number of members of future candidates also that are waiting, and we want to make sure we're as productive with our time as possible. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you very much. Mr. Anderson, thank you so much for applying, and thank you for your current service and your previous service in other capacities throughout our county. A lot of the questions that have been asked have been very enlightening to me because I had similar questions, so I'm glad that we took care of those. But I wanted to just ask you a little bit more about when you were describing your vision at the very beginning, and you talked about this need to be available and to make sure that people that had questions, et cetera, understood also what was going on. And I'm particularly interested in then what would you do to enhance the opportunities for example, millennials to participate in the process and understand what's happening? We get a lot of feedback sometimes, but it's just very spotty, and it depends on whatever is in front of us. So, what in your capacity, what ideas do you have for that? As well as, of course, the immigrant community, second-generation folks, and also the growing senior population. What will you do a little differently, I guess, to improve the way that folks then have opportunities to understand what's being proposed, but also to give you feedback, and then to inform, that vision that everybody desires?
Well, I mentioned in my application letter that I think increasing our capacity to communicate with people who have limited English proficiency is extremely important. We basically have one staff person who typically translates. In the case of the Long Branch sector plan, we had no translator. We had to when the staff held a public meeting at Rolling Terrace Elementary School, we had to rely on, I think it was CASA or Impact, who had a translation capability available. I think in a county that is as increasingly diverse as ours, that's just untenable. We need to have more people who speak Spanish and other languages so we can communicate directly and not rely on third parties to help us conduct those type of public processes. As for millennials, I think that what we've been doing with the Bethesda plan has been a step forward. The staff is going out to meet people where they are. It's not simply posting a notice and relying on them to show up at a meeting, either at the Regional Services Center or at a Civic Association meeting or existing institutional types of fora where people typically go to engage on civic issues, but to go find them in the places where they work, where they live, where they go out to eat, and come to them. And I think that the Bethesda sector plan, we're going to see more of that. Obviously, a lot has been made of things like social media and the internet, but I think that really it's more about giving people reasons to want to come out and engage, as opposed to necessarily the sheer quantity of information or the number of meetings you hold. In fact, sometimes you can hold so many meetings that people get meeting fatigue, and you might have been better off consolidating the number of points of public input so people can feel like, if I show up to this meeting, I can actually have a chance of having my voice heard that's not just going to get lost in the sea of process that takes place over months or years.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Navarro. Councilmember Reamer.
I'll try to be brief. I know it's been a long afternoon. So can you talk about how we can work together, our council and Park and Planning, to ensure that we have a competitive regulatory process, that our development process, that investment will feel confident that it can thrive in Montgomery County, because that has been a source of consistent challenge for us over the years.
Well, as I mentioned, I supported during the zoning rewrite the idea of the development review calendar, which should make it obvious where the problems are, where the delays are, so we can run them to ground. And if that's people in our agency, then we should accept responsibility for addressing those problems at a systemic level, not simply, as happens sometimes, somebody will send me an email or send the chair an email and say, can you help me out? I have a plan that seems to be stuck. Could you help me figure out how to dislodge it? And we'll forward that to the planning director or the deputy planning director. And usually they can break that logjam, but we need to systematize that. So it's not just an ad hoc process where if there's a problem, we fix the one problem that we have today and then we move on and don't try to figure out what is the problem with the system, whether that's a personnel issue or the way that the process is designed, to make sure that it's not happening repeatedly. I think that there's also an issue with other agencies, property owners, their consultants, others who in some cases may contribute to that delay, and we need to know that too. So we can figure, if we have transparency and visibility into the process, there will be no finger pointing or debate over whose fault it is, but rather we can identify where things have been hung up, figure out when the plan was submitted, when it reached each stage of the process, which reviewer or what task had to be performed that didn't get done in a timely way that's holding things up. So I think that that's a huge step towards building on the streamlining process that's already been underway with the record plat process and development review, to try to take out unnecessary pieces and streamline the amount of work and time that has to go into getting plans approved.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I see no other lights on, so Mr. Anderson, thank you very much for your willingness to serve, and we will be in contact with you within the week. So thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to